Hello, I'm Frank Solero, Senior Technical Instructor with CommVault. This presentation is a basic explanation of how storage policies work. A storage policy can be thought of as a container which will define sets of rules for how protected data will be managed. Each storage policy can have one or more sets of rules, each one independently managing data. These sets of rules are called storage policy copies. There are three primary rules that each policy copy will contain: what data will be managed, where it will be stored, and how long it will be kept for. For what data will be managed, this is defined through subclients. A subclient defines the actual data which will be managed. The data could be files and folders, virtual machines, databases. The subclient is then associated with the storage policy. For where the data will be stored, that is determined by the data path. For a disk library, the data path will be which media agent will move the data and what disk library will store the data. For a tape library, the data path will have a media agent and a removable media library. It will also have a drive pool, which allows you to specify which sets of drives in the library you want to use, and a scratch pool, which defines which set of tapes you want to use. For how long the data will be kept for, this is determined by retention. The two types of data that can be managed by a standard storage policy copy is backup and archive data. For both of these types, you can configure how many days to keep the data for. For backup data, you can also configure how many cycles to keep the data for. Cycles are important for backup data when performing full and incremental or differential jobs because multiple jobs may be required to restore the data. All of the jobs become dependent on one another to ensure all data from the point a full was conducted can be restored. For example, if you have a full and 4 incrementals and you need to restore a folder, different files may have been modified on different days. To restore the entire folder, all of the backup jobs may be required. You can also apply extended retention rules, which is also known as grandfather, father, son tape rotation. You can retain all backups for, let's say, 2 weeks. For the weekly fulls, you can retain the data for 1 month, your monthly fulls for 1 year, and your quarterly fulls for 10 years. For extended retention rules, you can determine how many days you want to retain the data for and how many tiers you want to use. Each policy copy will define the rules for subclients, data path, and retention. Within the storage policy, there will be one or more copies. The first copy is called the primary copy. Subclients are associated with the storage policy, which determines what data will be managed. We then define a data path and retention for the primary copy. There are two types of primary copies: Primary Classic, which manages traditional backup and archive data, and Snap Primary Copy, which will manage hardware snapshots. There are also secondary copies that can be configured. The idea of secondary copies is that once the data is moved to the primary copies, additional copies of the data can be made without touching the production servers. There are two types of secondary copies: synchronous and selective. A synchronous copy synchronizes itself with the source copy. What this means is if the source is managing a full, the synchronous will also manage the full. If the source has an incremental, differential, or transaction log, the synchronous copy will manage those as well. Synchronous copies are useful if you are sending data off-site every day. It is also good if you want point-in-time restore capabilities. For example, someone needs a file restored from a specific day during the cycle. A selective copy allows you to select specific jobs that will be managed. By default, it manages full backups, but incrementals and differentials can also be managed. You can select fulls based on a time period, such as month-end, quarter-end, or year-end. You can also select fulls based on number of cycles, days, weeks, or months. For each of these time periods, you could select the first or last full of the time period. One additional option is not to automatically select jobs. This will allow you to specify which jobs are selected based on schedules instead of the policy copy. The schedules that are used to generate secondary copies are called auxiliary copy operations. At this point, it is critical that the terms secondary copy and auxiliary copy are understood. A secondary copy determines how the data will be managed. There is no data there. To move data to the primary copy, servers are scheduled to back up. But to move the data from one copy to another, that is done by auxiliary copy operations. So an auxiliary copy is the scheduling mechanism that will move the data, which will then be managed by the secondary copy. So let's apply an example. We have 3 subclients: the default subclient, which contains data required to restore the operating system, a finance subclient managed in financial databases, and a mail subclient managed in user email. These subclients are associated with a storage policy. Schedules on the production servers back up each of these subclients to the primary copy. The data path will be a disk library and 1 media agent, and the retention will be 30 days and 4 cycles. We also need to get the data off-site every day, so we will create a secondary synchronous copy. We will associate all subclients with this copy to ensure all data gets off-site each day. The data path will be to a tape library using a media agent. We will also use the default drive pool and default scratch pool. The retention will be set to 60 days and 8 cycles. We also have compliance requirements for email and finance data. At the end of each quarter, we must send a full backup off-site for 10 years. In this case, we create a selective copy and only associate the finance and the email subclients with the copy. We will use the tape library data path and set the retention to 10 years. As you can see, the use of subclients and storage policies allows you to place specific data on media and retain that data based on technical and business needs. In this case, all data is required in the primary copy as well as the offsite DR copy, but only finance and email data is required for the compliance copy, so there is no need to include OS data. When you think about this concept in an enterprise environment, using this method to logically group data based on its business requirements can greatly reduce media consumption. For more information on CommVault Storage Policies and other product features, visit commvault.com/training. There are a variety of instructor-led and e-learning courses available. Thank you.